So, Mongar, I see you got your Red Wings hat. Are you in Detroit or Michigan?
Yes, sir. Yep. Southeast Michigan. Um, I was a Red Wings fan up until like probably 5 years ago when they started making just every decision imaginable to sabotage themselves, and it got too painful to keep watching. I catch a game every now and then just to see maybe if things have turned the corner. As of 2 weeks ago, it has not.
My dad is from Elk Rapids, and I
Really?
lived in Traverse City for a couple of years when I was in what was it, ninth and 10th grade.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
my grandma used to own an art gallery up in Northport, and we used to go up there every summer when I was a kid
yeah. We'd
growing
go up
up.
there every summer too when my grandpa was alive. He lived right downtown in Traverse City. So we, for my entire youth, we'd go up there, and then we lived there near them when my dad was in Japan for a year unaccompanied. He was in Iwakuni flying A4s and
Dad's Marine?
whatever else. Yeah, he was a Marine aviator. He was an attack pilot. And yeah, so when he was overseas and the Marines would do these 13-month unaccompanied tours. And so we'd usually live near either, my grandparents on his side or on my mom's side. So that was either Traverse City or St. Louis. Yeah, so
Wow,
big fan of Michigan. I almost
that's
went to
cool.
the University of Michigan. I was accepted there, and wound up, you know, for my sins, I went to the Naval Academy instead.
Well, I mean, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You could have been a doctor going to U of
Well,
M.
I thought I was going to be a naval architect, because I was a huge sailor in high school. I was a tennis player and a sailor, and they have a good naval architecture school there. But I had no idea what went into the syllabus. I wasn't, engineering inclined. So, things work out, right? I actually had to go to a year of prep school before I went to the Naval Academy because my SAT scores were too low.
Oh,
So I
wow.
went to the Marine Military Academy down in Harlingen, Texas, which
I
was
bet that was an
harder than a plebe
experience.
year. It was an experience. So I showed up there with long hair, fresh out of high school, like Bjorn Borg hair, and, got it shaved off, and,
Oh,
you know,
geez.
it was, but it was smart. I mean, that was a smart way to do it in retrospect. Because you can imagine being a high school senior, everybody's like, where are you going? I'm like, oh, I'm going to UNC. I'm going to ECU. I'm going to Duke. Oh, I'm going to this prep school down in Texas. Like, I thought you were going to the Naval Academy. Like, well, maybe it's going to take another year,
It's like
so
I'm
it was
I'm
a
I'm getting
drag.
there eventually.
Yeah, well, I didn't know, but, I was willing to take a chance because some of the JOs in my dad's squadron, he was a CO of an A6 squadron at the air station at Cherry Point, and they're in North Carolina. And we lived on base. After he came back from Japan, and we moved from Traverse City to Havelock, North Carolina, where the air station at Cherry Point is. And he took over this A6 squadron, the Green Knights, that are now flying F-35Bs.
Oh,
So they went from A6s to F-18Ds they were the first Marine Corps squadron to get the B. And he had actually flown A4s in VMA 121 in Vietnam, in Chu Lai and Da Nang. So he had a long history with the Green Knights. So, yeah, he was the skipper at the squadron there. And so some of his junior officers were grads, like, classes 72 and 73. And their stories were just like funny and kind of cool. And I had never been to the Naval Academy. And so I got the catalog. It's like, I think that's where I want to go because it just kind of at some weird level made sense. Not like you could lay it out, but just sort of in a general sort of metaphysical level. And so I applied and couldn't get a nomination, couldn't get an appointment. So found out about this prep school program. And, you know, again, in hindsight, I'm glad I did it that way because I was definitely ready for plebe year by the time I got there. And I was thinking if I had done this right at high school, I wouldn't have been ready, you know. And as it
Yeah.
was, I don't want to say it was easy, but I was, you know, after a year in Harlingen, Texas, at this prep school run by retired Marines, including some, you know, sergeant majors and staff sergeants and Korean War vets. This guy, Gunny Morton, had been at the Chosin Reservoir.
Oh, geez.
You know, so every one of these guys had these amazing, this guy's recon in Vietnam, and this guy was at the Chosin Reservoir, and this guy did this, and they all had these cool backstories, but they didn't take any shit. You know, these guys were tough.
Oh, yeah, I believe
and
it.
the military standard there was great. I mean, it was very high, you know, and so by the time I got to the academy, it was like, oh, this is like college. It's not that strict, you know. So it worked out.
Oh, that's awesome. That's all. Yeah, my old lady's a Marine.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, she went Marine Corps, I went Army, and she did her 4, and that was enough for her.
Okay.
So
What was her MOS?
Marine Corps bandsman.
Oh, okay.
She played the clarinet. She actually wanted to go to Iwakuni, Okinawa, Iwakuni, and I don't remember where her third choice was. You know, you get that wish list. Well,
Right.
I don't know how it went in officer country, but on the enlisted side, you got a wish list when you graduated training on where you wanted to go.
Right.
And so her top 3 was Okinawa, Iwakuni, and then one other one. And she ended up getting sent to Paris Island and did her entire enlistment at the base she did her training on. She was pissed. She was so pissed, but I ended up liking it because if you were, the way the Marine Corps handles their band is the band still deploys unless you're on a training base. If you're in the band on a training base, you are non-deployable.
Okay.
So she was non-deployable her whole 4, which made me happy because
Right.
I did deploy when I was
Yeah.
in the Army, and so
So
like
what did you do in the Army?
I was a truck driver. I was an 88 Mike.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody, I was originally supposed to be infantry. I was going to go infantry. That was the job I was going to pick. And I called my wife. She was in the Marine Corps at the time. I says, hey, honey, I'm at the recruiting station. I'm picking my job. She goes, great. What are you going to do? I said, well, I think I'm going to go 11 Bravo. And she's like, what's 11 Bravo? I'm like, infantry? She goes, hell no, you're not. I want my husband in a few years. Pick a safer job. So I'm like, okay, yes, dear. And I went back.
So what year was that? What year was that?
That was 2010. That was
okay.
January or February of 2010.
So I embedded with Task Force Rakhisan, 101st Airborne in Afghanistan in 2010.
Really?
Yeah, Paktika Province, Yosef Kel, Yahya Kel. Those guys are badass. I spent a month with them, doing all manner of things: mounted patrols, dismounted patrols, air assaults, and H-47s, sniper missions. It was amazing. So great respect for the Army.
Were you still in the Navy at that point?
No, I was the editor of military.com.
Ah, that'll do it.
So when I got out, I retired. I was teaching at the Naval Academy, retired, worked on the V-22 program down at Nav Air for 3 years, got that airplane fielded. And then I met the editor of military.com, who was a big fan of Punk's War. And he's like, hey, come out to San Francisco and see if you can be our editor. I'm like, I don't know anything about the internet, right? And he goes, no, that's fine. So I wound up doing that job for 9 years. It was amazing. And I lived in the DC area, Southern Maryland, and would go out to San Francisco a week, a month, that whole time. And then, I'd do a lot of things. Wherever I needed to be, I'd be, including we spent some time in Afghanistan, me and my managing editor. It was life-changing, just an incredible time. And we were, we started in Kabul, went to Bagram, pushed out to Paktika. So we're at Fob Salerno, Fob Sharana, these combat outposts, like I said, Yosef Kel, Yahya Kel. went down to Kandahar, went to Helmand and Bastion, where, you know, the air base is down there. That's where we flew the V-22. Came back flew with a British C-130 from Bastion back to Kabul and interviewed General McChrystal 2 weeks before he got fired for that Rolling Stone article where he badmouthed President Obama. So it was an action-packed time. And, you know, I didn't know a whole lot about Army infantry or the Army, period, as a function of my, you know, going to the Naval Academy and being a naval aviator. And it was fantastic. These guys were so professional, so awesome. And we did everything with them. It was really, really great. So.
Oh, that's nuts. Yeah, I never had the pleasure of Afghanistan. I was over in Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with the bases out that away, but we were we were based out of Cobb Spiker, which was in Tikrit. And then our job, basically, when we got there, our tasking from the president was to shut down Iraq. We were part of his drawdown, but like we were the drawdown. We were one company of truck drivers, and we actually absorbed another company of they were 88 hotels, and 88 Hotel, I don't remember what the exact name is, the exact name of the MOS, but basically they were stevedores. You know, few people know this, but the Army has a larger Navy than the Navy. And and so we do. They're just not warships. But they basically 88 hotels were stevedores. They would operate the Kalmar container handlers and the forklifts and bring ships in and out of port, and, you know, all that dockside stuff. That was their job. And they were, you know, in like crane operating and stuff. And we got these guys and we were basically told, hey, teach them how to drive trucks. And then, you know, like plans often do, you know, we got over there and then the mission changed. We were supposed to do our own security. And then we get over there and the mission changes. Now the National Guard's doing our security. And all of us are running trucks and nothing else. And we were given a year, and we were told if we weren't done in 12 months, we were being extended. And we got done in 10. We got done in 10 months. It was crazy. I remember in specific one mission, quote unquote, it was like 67 hours straight. I think I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes. It was awful. I do not remember that very fondly, but better for the experience, I suppose.
Well, let's talk DCS and let's talk Tomcat.
DCS and Tomcat. They're like everything else, it comes with the gigantic disclaimer that if you don't want to answer a question, say so. No hard feelings, doesn't matter. First one I want to ask is in DCS, the way they have the INS modeled in the F-14, just like in the real one, it drifts. How big of a factor was INS drift in the actual aircraft? Like, and on a typical mission, a standard mission you would fly, how often did you have to fix it and realign, and what type of fix was the most common or practical or easy to do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So let's talk shore base first. So if you're doing a shore-based alignment, generally you didn't have runaway winds and it wasn't a problem. Now, when you hooked up the SINS cable aboard the ship, that was kind of a mixed bag. And so depending on, you know, the noise in the cable and the ship's connectivity and other things, you could have runaway winds. So you really, on the display, and I'm blanking on what you guys tell me what the display is called by your right knee.
Wrench.
That's where you could look at the winds, right? And so you'd see reasonable winds like 120 knots, out of, 360 for 120 knots at 20,000 feet. And all of a sudden they'd be like 800 knot winds. And you're like, okay, we got runaway winds. So you'd have to come out of INS mode because you couldn't do an airborne alignment. There was no such thing.
Really?
Yeah, that was not a thing. And so, you'd have to go into the IMU backup, nav. If you had a TACAN and not the ship's TACAN, but either a land fix that you could, update on or something else and plug in the winds based on the forecast. That's why you'd pay attention during the metro brief at the winds at altitude, because if you had runaway winds and you had to come out of INS, you would have to manually input the winds and then kind of DR for the rest of that hop. So it didn't happen that often. And when you had a bad SINS cable, the Tomcat squadrons would jump all over the ship's, deck crew and the people responsible for maintaining that cable and say, we got to get this squared away. And they'd send tech reps on the beach because it had to be right. So the thing about the Tomcats INS, it was designed to get the Phoenix missile in a 25-mile basket. So it's not super precise. And so, understand that as the airplane evolved and we got the lantern pod, when you put a lantern pod on the airplane, the nav from the lantern pod is primo. And so that's what you would use. On your PTID, the Latin long and everything there was the most accurate. It was more accurate than what the AUG-9 was telling you. And then you could marry those things together. But in the early days, you definitely had to keep your eye on the winds, because if you're just sitting there not paying attention and you're doing blue water ops where you have no land reference. In fact, we lost a Tomcat on a West Coast cruise doing this chainsaw mission where we're 500 miles away from the ship, and they had runaway winds and they had no idea where they were, and they wound up flaming out because they couldn't find their way back to the ship. And it turns out when they crashed, they're like 180 miles away from, I want to say they were on Kitty Hawk. So you definitely had to keep your eye on the winds. But the nav was pretty rudimentary. And I was always happy because you could tell when you got the alignment by how fast the Carrot was walking over as to the quality of the alignment. There's sort of a meter to it, as you guys know, from the DCS backseat. And so I imagine that you always get a good alignment. But if it started hanging up, the Carrot's like hanging up, and you're like, okay, this is not, it's taking too long. And we used to also do, when we would stand the alert, you'd get an alignment and then go into the alert alignment. So if you had to go in 5 minutes, you could just get a quick alignment and go, right? So for the alert 5, you already had an alignment, and it would keep up with the ship's motion, kind of the system would DR itself. So if you got not launched the alert 5, you wouldn't have to hook up a SINS cable. You just go to, Cataline is, if you look on the selection there, Cataline is for alert launches. And
so Cataline was your alert 5 stored
Yeah,
heading.
so that the predicate there is when you man the alert, you get a regular SINS alignment, and then you set it to Cataline. And so now you're in the position that if you get the launch, you're not going to take the full, it took upwards of 15 minutes to get an alignment, a full alignment with the diamond and the dot in the middle of the diamond.
I think in DCS to do if you're doing a full non-stored heading alignment, it's in DCS, they call it a stored heading align, and you have to, Wrench, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to put it in Cataline to make that happen, and you get the ash align, or the ash on the TID as the thing's ticking over.
Yeah. So in DCS, you can do a stored heading alignment at an airfield for convenience, because you're in a sim, there's going to be some things that aren't true to life, just so that it's not as boring.
Right.
So in DCS, it always takes 8 minutes. There can be other things that happen that can slow you down, but an alignment done properly in DCS takes 8 minutes, and then an ash align is obviously faster from there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and it's 8 minutes flat, but it will hang up. It'll hang up after like 2 or 3 minutes, I think it is, if you didn't put the coordinates in right, or
Yeah.
if you messed up some part of the process, the carrot will hang, and then you have to turn it all off and start all over again. I know.
So I still know the Latin long for the line at Oceana.
Just seared into your memory.
Yeah, 3648.9, 76021.
Elevation.
It's 20 feet. You just don't forget this shit.
No, I expect not.
And since the channels kind of started exploding, and I'm watching a lot of the screen grab DCS stuff, and we'll talk about what I think I'm going to be doing with DCS. We're in comms about a scenario that I'm going to be coming up with, like Bio did, my good friend Bio, and mine's an OSW, Operation Southern Watch, circa 97 scenario. His is an 85 at Nellis. I guess I don't know if you guys have played his scenario.
I was actually I was the voice of the tower controller in the
really?
Zone
Okay.
5 campaign. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So I've known
so I'm familiar.
Bio since 1985. When I got back from my first cruise, and this is all in the latest episode of the channel, the Rio Responsibilities channel episode. But I was doing my first Fleet Fighter Air Readiness program, what we call FARP. And so the Top Gun guys came out. It's the first time I've ever dealt with Top Gun. And so it was all the names you see in the credits for Top Gun, the aviators, Hollywood Dishart, Jaws Winnefeld, all of the dudes that were the all-stars who were there at the time helping them make the movie, and also Bio. So Bio was the first Top Gun Rio that I ever dealt with, and he was just so cool. And as a Rio, first tour Rio, you're looking for guys to sort of give you, ideas of how does the career go and how should you behave. And he was just such a great guy, and so smart. And, even then, because this is before Top Gun was part of Strike U, they were still at Miramar. And it's funny though, they said, oh yeah, we're filming this movie called Top Gun. And the director, Tony Scott, he wants us to tell him if it's bullshit. And so there's this one scene where they're briefing in the hangar and they're wearing cowboy hats and stuff. And we said that would never happen. So they're not going to put that in. But they did, right? And all the other goofy shit that's in that movie. But so I've known I just talked to him on Sunday, as a matter of fact. I'm hearing from a lot of people since the channel's kind of, gotten more popular, and Bio is one of them. I heard from Bill Shepard, the astronaut, yesterday, who I've known forever. And he's a SEAL who became an astronaut.
Man,
he's a longtime friend of mine. So it's kind of cool. Scott Kelly, I flew with Scott Kelly in VF-143. He has the record on the space station. And his book, Endurance, actually has a vignette from when we flew together in VF-143, and we were being chased down by a sandstorm in the Gulf. And I could, on the DDD, I was just seeing this black line coming towards us in pulse. I'm like, and then I could paint the ship, right? So you can see this black line of the sandstorm. I'm like, and his call sign was Grace Kelly, get it?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, Grace, we got to haul ass or else we're going to land in the sandstorm. So we got aboard and the sandstorm hit. It was like Final Countdown or something. It was
oh man,
really cool. But anyway, I digress. So at the field, you even if you're in a cross country, you wouldn't do a cat line. Obviously, you do a full up alignment, and you would know what the Latin long. And these are the days before GPS, right? You'd have to go into base ops and go, okay, it would be there in big letters, transient line Latin long, and you write it down. And there's a couple of tenths off. It's not like today where you can even take your phone and have the GPS app or whatever.
Down to a meter, yeah.
Yeah, down to a meter. So I didn't, and I'm kind of jumping around here, but when I was a department head, we were flying over Bosnia. This is off of the USS America, final cruise of the America in the Adriatic, and we're trying to get the Serbs out of Sarajevo. We're flying our asses off, doing a lot of TARPS missions, and as you guys know, controlled primarily in the backseat, and 3 cameras. This is before we had a digital TARPS. You know, it was all the wet film stuff, and we had this big, we call it a Fisher-Price GPS. It was literally this big on your knee, and it was big and yellow, and the screen, you kind of make it, but it was a GPS, and it had an antenna, and so we actually had, and now you realize just how inaccurate your INS was, because you had real that long. But when you went into a turn, right, so and we were hauling ass because we were afraid of the SA-6 threat, you know, like Scott O'Grady got shot down, right? And so you're by Banja Luka, and you wang on the turn there in the northwest quadrant of the country, and we basically just do this, you know, round robin around the perimeter of the country, and focusing on the Perigador mass grave sites, because the Serbs had done a lot of, you know, dirty shit, but when you went into a turn, that Fisher-Price the antenna would be blanked, and you still come out of the turn, and you're like, I don't know what my lat long is anymore, and your INS was so far off, and God help you if you wander into Serbia, you know, that was going to be bad. And so anyway, that was my first dealing. And then when we got Lantern, it was not a problem. Now we had really primo, you know, GPS data and good stuff, you know. So that's a long answer for Runaway Winds and the accuracy. So it was not a systemic problem, but it did happen. And the Rio would definitely have to keep his eyes on the TSD. Is that what it was? Over here on the right panel, where you had your raw gear, and you could change what presentation. You could put the TAC in there, et cetera. But
yeah, in DCS, it's called the Electronic Countermeasures Display, ECMD. And it's called that because it was originally designed to operate as an RWR scope. And then its purpose was changed and the name was not.
Okay.
Like a lot of things in the Tomcat, that happened a lot.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Wrench, for jumping in, because I'm just like, I'm the stick operating meat puppet up front. I don't know what that is.
It's the right attitude to have, Mongo. That's the right attitude to have.
Stay in the front where you belong.
Exactly. So that reminds me, so the guy who ran the simulators when I was at Cat 1 going through the RAG, his call sign was Wheels. So Wheels was a VF-14 Rio who on his first deployment, he got shit-faced in Palma and fell out of a hotel balcony, off a balcony, and was paralyzed from the waist down.
Oh, shit. That's awful.
And so Wheels so now he's NPQ from flying. He's not in the Navy. And so he's the simulator guy. And so he had a lot of attitude, and he was very, you know, much trying to give the Rios, this fresh caught Rios, our swagger. And so he would call the pilots nose gunners. That was his label for pilots, which I think I used in one of the books. I think I used that in Punk's War. So yeah, Wheels, who I'm still in comms with on Facebook, he's quite a personality, great guy. So the raw gear, that's another thing that, you know, the ALR 45 and 50 was a piece of shit. And then we got the 167, it was much better. And we got that with the B had the 167, the A plus B, and the A never got other than the 45 and 50. And so that was so bogus, like you'd be flying over, you know, Operation Southern Watch over Southern Iraq, and you get tickled and you're getting spiked and you just, so you're pinging the E2 or the EP3 or the other ELINT birds that were there. And we're like, okay, I'm getting tickled at 2 o'clock, and they're like, there's nothing there. You know, it was like a cell phone tower or something that was, you know, so you basically just turn the thing off, you know, so the raw gear was really ineffective in the A. And we'd go to the OAG, and they'd have this wish list like, okay, IRST and this, and we're like, IRST, how about raw gear? Let's make that number one. That should be the top priority at the OAG, and they never made it happen. And so had we done other missions in Desert Storm, that would have been a big factor, you know. And if you look at what the Hornet has and what the, you know, modern airplanes have, if you look at what the Eagle has, not to mention the E, but the C, if you look at what the Wild Weasel guys have, that's good raw gear. That's raw gear that you can actually, and I know, you know, we're reacting to raw gear in some of these scenarios to, you know, to beam the missile threat and to, you know, either hold it off or do the glib maneuvers. And that's super realistic, you know. So the bottom line from what I'm seeing, and I'm going to get smart on DCS, I've been in comms with a guy in Austin, and this is where the conversation, in fact, we're talking tomorrow, came up about a Mooch scenario. You know, so my scenario, like I said, would be an OSW circa 97, 2 carrier ops in the Gulf. And so you would launch, you hit the heavy tanker, go in country, and now your mission, it's a, you know, offensive OCA mission where you're protecting the UN flagged U-2. So patrolling the no-fly zone below the 33rd parallel. And so your mission is keep the MiG-25 was the main threat. You know, this is a Mach 2 airplane. So you got to keep the MiG-25 off the U-2, but you cannot go above the 33rd parallel. So you can just see already the trigonometry of that is something where you're going to have coordination with your wingman. You're going to have coordination with the other section. You're going to have to be talking to the AWACS or the E2 very tightly. You're going to have to know where that S3 or the U2 is. You know, they're up there at 80,000 feet going 150 knots. And so they're pretty much a grape for a MiG-25. And the other thing I'm going to bake into the scenario is there's also a SAM trap. You know, and so this kind of starts to be a Desert Fox sort of hybrid too, where they're tempting you by, because you would know, okay, MiG-25s are airborne, they're above 33rd, maybe you're even painting them, you know, and playing a little bit of cat and mouse and entice, you know, intrigue that they're actually airborne. And so maybe they do a feint to get you to come north and forget about the ground threat, and then they would bag you with a SAM. So, you know, I'm thinking double cycle event. First cycle is some of this, you know, you're getting, your raw gear is getting tickled. You're hearing from the AWACS that the MiG-25, the Foxbat's airborne. You know that the E2 has, or the U2 rather, has some, you know, time to loiter. And so he's going to be there for a while. That's why it's a double cycle event. And then when he's out of harm's way mid-cycle, now you go back and hit the tanker again, which is over Kuwait, right? So I love the tanking realism is fantastic. And so you guys, you know, do that plug, you're getting 10,000 pounds, then go back into Southern Iraq. And now this time for the second cycle, it starts getting sporty, right? Maybe there's you're working with some other, you know, Air Force assets as, you know, in accordance with the ATO, because this was all ATO fragged missions. So this would be definitely distinct from what BIOS scenarios are. And so I'm excited to, you know, sort of ideate with these guys and see what we can come up with. So we'll have to see.
Nice. That sounds like a lot of fun. There's an F18 campaign in DCS right now based on the Raven 1 book, written by
Kevin Miller.
Kenneth Miller. Yep. And
Kevin Miller. He's
Kevin.
Moser.
That's right. He's what?
Oh, yeah. So I know him well. He was CAG Paddles, the CAG LSO, when I was on Ike. And again, in the most recent episode, I tell a story about how he literally saved my life and that of my pilot in the North Atlantic. So you guys probably know that if you're in rough seas, the ball can't keep up, the lens.
Right.
If the pitch rate is, I forget what the exact, you know, more than 5 degrees a second. the lens. So you go to MOVLAS, which is manually operated visual landing system. So the LSO literally has a handle where he's manipulating the ball against the datums based on his eye, right? And so working MOVLAS and also giving us a lot of sugar calls, decks up, hold what you got, decks down, don't chase it. And Grinch, we were having trouble getting aboard. I mean, this is North Atlantic, Shetland Islands, Iceland, UK gap, Tom Clancy scenario shit. So the ceilings were low. We did this really cool strike over Scotland. That was the fun part. We're going through the moors and the locks and fighting the Brits. And then it's time to come home. And now it wasn't so much fun. And we were icing up in holding. So we had to kind of mutiny to get out of the icing conditions, which the air ops officer didn't appreciate. He's like, you're in an airway. We have international airliners. I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to ice up and fall out of the sky. And so we came down, finally got below the layer there. And it was about right at 1,000 feet, so we're zorching in at 1,200 feet. And so we're in and out of the clouds in accordance with the Cat 3, procedures. So we start coming down. Now we got the ship and we get out of phase, get waved off. Second time, again, Hoser, Kevin Miller, Raven 1 guy, is working MOVLAS, and he's giving us these sugar calls, And so I'm meanwhile doing my co-pilot stuff like power, or XL decel trends, looking over Grinch's shoulder, and I can see the lens moving, I can see the boat moving. So you're either looking at this plan form or you're looking at the stern, right? I mean, and the landing sight picture would change drastically. You're 700 feet per minute, and this thing that you're trying to land on is like just wildly, the sight picture's changing with the sea state. And so finally he says a little power, and then he says, easy with it. And so Grinch put on a burst of power, and we had a long bolter. So we hit the S3. It's the recovery tanker that's hawking us. Baskets jumping around because the wind is just all over the place. So it was hard to get plugged. We only got 500 pounds. Come back around. Third time we land, taxi one wire, and it was so rough that you shut down in the wires, and they would put a tractor on you and pull you out of the landing area.
Wow.
Right?
So you weren't even able to weren't even allowed to taxi to your.
No. And so that gives you an idea. And so as soon as you chain, it was hard to get out of the airplane and get down the ladder. And so you're in the catwalk and you finally get in the ready room. You're just sitting in your ready room chair like, oh my fucking God, And so I say to Grinch, I'm like, what was with that burst of power when Hoser said, little power? He said, I saw the ship's screws. He saw the propellers, because that's how far the stern came out of the water. And he said, it kind of freaked me out to actually see the screws turning, Wow. And I'm like, I'll bet, And so we went north to Norway, and we were in the fjords, which were, like glass. It was amazing flying. Because the trick was you'd hide in the fjord, like Carrier would hide in the fjord, and now the Russian bombers couldn't see you. And so we would be marshaling over land, and then kind of at the last minute, you'd go feet wet and land on the ship. It was amazing flying. And plus Norway's a very pretty country. We fought those, the Norwegian F-16s and stuff like that. So after we got there, it was more reasonable, but the flying on the way was insane. Scariest flying I've ever done, without a doubt. So Hoser was CAG paddles, and I saw him at Tailhook in 2019, and I, every time I'm with him, I bore whoever's around by, this guy saved my life. Let me tell you this story.
Well, you gotta kind of give credit where credit's due. Full disclosure, when you said his call sign the first time, you said Hoser. I swear to God, you said poser. That's why I was like, excuse me?
No,
like that's a hot take. Like that's a hot take.
He's the real deal. And I helped him with his books early on, and very proud of what he's done as a writer.
Yeah, when the campaign came out, I actually Shorts, one of the guys who flies with us. He's a good guy. He's young. He was actually he was in the Marine Corps officers program to go and get commissioned and go fly Hornets for them, but then he decided to try and switch gears to the Air National Guard. So he's still working on that, but he's of all of us wannabes, he's probably the one that's got the best shot, if we're being honest, of getting to go and do it for real. But he actually read Raven 1 last year, or maybe it was the year before, and he told all of us, he's like, hey guys, you got to check out this book. I just found it. It's really cool. And I ended up finally, once the campaign came out, I was like, oh, this does look interesting. And I got the campaign. I'm like, maybe I should read the book before I play through the whole thing, and went and got the book. And it was fantastic.
Yeah,
I didn't care for the sequel so much, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, that's being a writer, right? It's like, okay, now hit another home run. Like, really?
Right.
Yeah, I started the third book earlier today, so once I slog the rest of the way through that,
He went further.
The Punk series is the next one on my list.
Okay, great. Well, I am proud of the Punk series end to end. And so my fourth and fifth books where my protagonist became a SEAL. How cliche can that be? The 8 is okay. The militia kill is a piece of junk. And so what happens is you're under contract, I think my statement is the Punk series. That's what I had to say. That's what I know about those characters are the people I knew. And that holds up. In fact, we're, as I put on the channel today, we're in comms with Naval Institute Press, who was the original publisher of Punk's War in Hardback 20 years ago this month, which seems crazy to me. But they're going to do all three, as a new versions of all three, which is exciting because now there's a whole bunch of people in the DCS world and the other folks who are following or subscribers who never read Punk, and so they hold up, and they have a lot of detail that would inform you guys and the questions you have, and they're this is why the casual reader may have been put off by the books, was this level of detail, because I just want to throw you in the deep end, just like when I'm talking on the channel. I'm not going to dumb it down. It's just the way I talk, and either you get it or you don't. But if I stop and do all these, phrase explanations, it's just not fun, and so that's kind of how I wrote the books. So I'm excited to have them come out again. My favorite, I will tell you guys, of the three is Punk's Wing. And I think that's my most complete thought. And I think that's the longest of the three. That's 125,000 words. The others are roughly 100,000 words.
That's the second one, right? That's the middle one?
That's the second one. Yeah, it's the second one. So Punk starts out as a RAG instructor, and he has this female Cat 1 that's coming through, and she's kind of a problem child, and she has this senator who's like trying to ensure she makes it. So there's this sort of political, put their finger on the scale kind of thing. And she doesn't want that help, but she's getting it anyway. So it's sort of a complex study of the second wave of female integration, because the first one was like Carroll Green and Carrie Lorenz and all of those people. And that was, I don't want to say it was disaster, but it was really sort of forced into the situation. The second one had a little more sort of elegance about it, but there still were integration issues and people that came from other communities that probably didn't have the grades to get Tomcats. And the Tomcat, as you guys know, the A particularly pre-DFCS was hard to fly around the boat, and this is the Kara Hultgreen. I'm going to do an episode about the Kara Hultgreen mishap because, her circumstance was survivable, and she misdiagnosed it and did exactly the wrong thing, right? Which is, what we know about the Tomcat is if you keep the angle of attack under control, you can go single engine all day, right? So keep the angle of attack under 14 units and just fly like, a Frisbee, just fly like this and then push boot rudder and go, okay, great. What she did was, okay, flames out or compressor stall, left motor, got to turn right. And if you put in right stick at that point, as the angle of attack goes out of control, you're going to have that pro-verse yaw the wrong way, right? So fortunately, and this is one for the Rios in the room, is the Rio was paying attention. So he saved his life. Unfortunately, the sequence, as we know, takes 0.9 seconds end to end. And that was literally a lifetime for Kara. But the Rio got out, and he barely, he didn't get any swings in the chute. He had just enough length to get the chute to barely open as he skimmed across the water, right? So just think about it. It's a nightmare scenario, right? Here you are at the 90, all of a sudden you hear the deedle and you see the TITs going up and all the signs of a compressor stall, and she doesn't have but a half a potato to diagnose it. Now, so the Rio has to go, basically, you got it, and if you don't get an answer, you eject, and so just like that, right? And so what she should have done, and this was recreated in the simulator, and you're getting an advanced look at what I'm going to say on this episode, which is, okay, first thing you got to manage, angle of attack, right? So just bunt the nose, and you level the wings with rudder, not with stick. Neutralize the stick. Do not program right stick. So if she had just got the angle of attack under control, mill power on the good motor, angle of attack under control, ignore the yaw. Don't worry about the yaw. It's not going to kill you. Angle attack, and just fly, whatever angle you were at the carrier, who gives a shit? Just don't hit the island, right? Now program in the rudder, get yourself under control, and either divert or do a single engine approach to the ship. She would have been fine. And they recreated this. A guy named Puke McLean recreated this. He was a RAG instructor in the simulator. He's like, imminently survivable. You just have to diagnose it right, and so that's what you guys know, because what I'm seeing is DCS is hyper accurate. It just blows me away in terms of, starter procedures, in terms of comms, in terms of switchology, in terms of, interface between cockpits, in terms of meter of a sortie, right? I mean, you're talking about, you do a SINS alignment just to speed it up because it's boring. But I'll tell you what, you're transiting all the way to the area. You're doing all the appropriate comms. It's you guys are flying real missions, and so it's making me energized to plug in and fully get smart on DCS, both cockpits, so I can be literate when I'm talking with, squadrons, but also it's shaking loose. In fact, I tweeted this a couple of days ago. I wake up in the morning, and I wake up early because, I'm an old fart, and my dogs, I have 4 dogs that want to get up at 5 in the morning, right? And a stat will just fall out of my head, like air source left, or, probe to all instead of, internal, and how many pounds of gas is in the external, and, all these details. What were I got to remind myself of the HUD symbology in bomb mode, because I want to do an air to mud.
We actually just did that this past weekend.
Okay.
We were doing some Bombcat stuff because normally when we go out in Tomcats, we're doing air to air, but there's a tedium to air to air, and well, as you very well know.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so we were actually doing some Bombcat stuff, and Wrench and I were on our dedicated server when we have a training mission that's set up, that's persistent, more or less. It's got F-14s and F-18s and all this stuff. And he and I were heading out to the bomb ranges we have, and we rolled in on our first target on the range, and we were Angels 20 coming in. I'm holding it level and steady. I got the lantern repeater up on the VDI down here so I can get my guidance symbology, and following it in 1 degree left, 1 degree back right, dead on, and, you do your fence in check, and it hit 0, and, he and I are talking. I'm going, okay, 5 seconds, 3, 2, pickle, and nothing. And he goes, I'm like, did it come off? He goes, I didn't hear the thump. I'm like, okay, off right. And, we turned south and off to the south and started egressing feet wet to reset and come back in. And I asked him, I'm like, okay, so what happened? Master arms to arm. I was in the parameters. I'm like, ACM panel set up. What's going on? And it's just crickets back there. And he goes, ignore the clicks. I'm like, did you forget to turn on the stations?
You don't hear any switches being flipped. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. Nothing happened.
Just go, yeah, exactly. It's just, you don't hear switches being. I'm like, okay, let's try that again. And so we go back in, same target, same attack profile. And this time hit 0, pickle, get that nice whoom. As the bomb fell away, it was a GBU 24 that time, Wrench, or did we drop the 12s first? Doesn't matter. And come off right, and I'm watching it, and it's literally just like a laser, straight in, dead center of the target. And we have a script that runs on that mission that gives you instant feedback BDA. And DCS has a built-in BDA thing, but the script that Wrench kindly wrote gives us range from target. So how far off were you? And it was 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter for all 4 LGBs. So yeah, it's air to ground in the Cat is a uniquely fun thing, which actually brings me to a question that we wanted to ask. When doing gun runs, air to ground, what was like a typical altitude that you guys would hold at, and then when cleared in hot would roll, do your 30 degree, 40 degree, however much it is, offset and roll in? What altitude would you normally hold at operationally?
So we would, a lot of the strafing that we did was at Dare County Range in North Carolina. In fact, if you've seen Peanut Butter Falcon, that movie is a cool movie. It takes place in Dare County, and when I think of Dare County, that was where the bombing ranges. You couldn't drop live there. You could do live, you could do bullets, but we'd have to do Blue Death for the bombing stuff. So I'm trying to think of the guns. I want to say 5,000 feet, and the range when you like you're talking about, you do a aggressive square turn, line up, boom, or overbank, boom, coming downhill, like you said, either 30 or 45 degree strafe. And I'm trying to think of what the best range was to make the shot. It's like 1,500 feet. You guys probably know better than I do. But 5,000, the pattern altitude was 5,000 feet.
Really? So there was no consideration for like man pads or things like that? Because I think man pads go up to, I think they're a threat up to 10,000.
Yeah.
And so you've got like your SA 9s and stuff that go up a little higher.
So yes, but that's not how, when we were just doing strafing, we were working on accuracy. It's like doing a sharpshooter, like marksmanship.
Got it.
We weren't doing like a real world, there's a man pad here. Now, the other thing that if you guys haven't tried conventional bombing, that's pretty sporty. So the Tomcat is a 10 mil conventional bomber. The Hornet is a 1 mil conventional bomber. Very accurate. The Hornet HUD, that's a death dot. The Tomcat, not so much.
No.
So Pipper, Diamond, pull-up cues, all of that. There's some Kentucky windage in there. The guys who were good bombers were just sort of had the seat of the pants thing. It was kind of cool. And we come back and debrief the HUD tapes, and you'd see exactly what they were cueing on. And it wasn't, if you just depended on, okay, at this range, when the Pipper hits a diamond, that should be exactly accurate. And now I'll do my 3G, 4G pull. And I just slung the bomb. And so getting good at conventional bombing in the Tomcat. So if you guys were designing your syllabus, air to mud, I would do, yes, strafing. I would do conventional bombing. That's sort of your rite of passage to be able to do precision guided lantern stuff, right? So do like you're talking about, okay, high ingress, roll ins, man pad threat, right? And then do the pops, which are a blast. So you're coming in at 500 feet or lower, 100 feet, and you do this, when you get, again, on the ranges I'm blanking on, but let's just say when you're like 4 miles from target, and this is based on the waypoint, right? So I would call the pop, you just pull up, get to, what was it? Like, again, you're considering a man pad threat. So get up to 10,000 feet, boom, pulling over, come down, pickle, get down low again and just screaming. And the Intercoastal Waterway ran adjacent to this, and you can just imagine the thrill show. If you're a family on your yacht heading for Florida, and here comes this Tomcat at 540 knots, transonic. It was a blast. And so those were cool hops. And as the threat got more sophisticated, as we saw in Desert Storm 1, going in low was a bad idea, and that's why the A6s and the Tornadoes and the Harriers got their shit handed to them, and the occasional Bronco, because they were down low, and they were wedded to this low altitude ingress mission. And so if you get ZSUs and man pads and small arms fire, which you had in great numbers in Iraq in 91, you're going to get shot down. The lion's share of the POWs were A6 guys and Tornado guys and Harrier guys. There's one Tomcat crew that got shot down over H4 in Western Iraq. Larry Slade and who was the pilot? Larry Slade was the Rio, who was fundamental in developing the lantern system in the mid-90s. You know who else helped a lot? Snort Snodgrass. Snort was Fitwing. He was the fighter wing commander, and he's the guy that got Larry, everything he needed to make that happen. That is really a miraculous transformation of a legacy platform, an analog airplane that became a precision guided bomber and changed everything. If we hadn't had the F-14 and Lantern post 9/11, we would have been sucking in terms of getting to Masir Sharif and Herat from the North Arabian Sea, because the Hornet couldn't get there. It would take 3 and 4 hits of the tanker, and when they got there, they wouldn't have any firepower. It would be a waste. So thank God we had the Tomcat and Lantern in time for, OEF.
Actually, that reminds me of another question from our list, which was while we're talking about the Lantern. In your video where you discussed the Lantern, I want to say it was your most recent one. You mentioned about using the Lantern on the PTID, the programmable TID that came a little bit later.
Yeah.
In DCS, our Bs only have the original TID. So to your knowledge, could you use the Lantern pod on the original TID?
No, it's not a digital, that's an analog piece of gear. And it's run by a physical tape, and so no, you needed the PTID to do Lantern.
So that's an anachronism in our particular version. That's one of the things is like a lot of people get really bent out of shape about really minute details, and not to go on a long-winded.
People in DCS he's referring to. There's
certain
I got it.
Real
guys
diehard guys.
Rivet counters.
Yeah.
I've long said, not to go on a huge tangent here because we do have to try to get to some of these, but for a long time I've said that it's like the Star Trek universe doesn't make any sense either, right? Yeah. So we have to establish and imagine an internally consistent DCS universe, because it's never going to be 100% true to life. Like in the imaginary DCS universe, a human pilot can sustain 3.5 Gs for 10 minutes and be fine.
Yeah.
It's things like that. And so, it's sort of disappointing. Like, oh, you couldn't use the Lantern on the original TID, but you can understand why Heatblur, the developer of that module kind of shoehorn it in.
Why
Yeah,
they made
otherwise-
the decision that they
No,
did.
that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's a fair choice. And, I mean, again, I'm blown away by the realism of DCS. So at some level, it is, like you said, rivet counting. All I will say is the PTID was a game changer. And the display, that's the other thing, the resolution of the display and the size of the display, because you have to understand, and this is where the beauty of my career progression, starting flying the Tomcat in 83 all the way to 98. And so that was the early air-to-air into conventional bombing in the early 90s, and then precision guided bombing in the late 90s, not to mention all the other air-to-air developments that were happening. There were some black programs, and everything was getting thrown in the back seat. So first cruise, as you mentioned, Mongo, air-to-air can be a little bit of a snoozer if there's nobody out there. So, hands on the ECS rails and like, okay, run the intercept and, are we there yet? And then in subsequent missions, the Rio was busy as shit. I mean, in subsequent deployments, it just got busier and busier. And so you're not just firing up the INS and waiting for your alignment. You're firing up the Lantern and you're loading coordinates and this other, air-to-air system and all kinds of stuff. And you had other stuff strapped to your knee, and it's amazing. But the workload literally increased 4x over the time that I was flying the F-14. So my point is, Bosnian War was a good example. So we had dumb bombs in 1995. We didn't have Lantern yet. And so it was being developed by Rat Slade and Snort as fighter wing and all the folks who were helping with that. And so they were moving at best speed, but it wasn't IOC'd and it wasn't on fleet airplanes. So we relieved the Theodore Roosevelt, and they had already started bombing Sarajevo and all around the country. And so we hauled ass there. Never forget it. Bill Cross, who was a Tomcat guy, was skipper of America, or he's actually USA Bat Group. He was the admiral. He was skipper of what? Ike. Yeah, he was skipper of Ike for my previous cruise. And then he became the battle group commander. And so he comes up on the 1MC. We're off the Azores. And so we think it's going to be a love boat cruise where we're, 4 days in port, 6 days at sea kind of thing. And he goes, gentlemen, I just got a phone call from Admiral Abbott, who is 6th Fleet. We've been told to make best speed for the Adriatic. And he said, we're going to war. It's like, everybody's like, yeah, it's like old school, rally around the flag boys kind of shit. So we got there, and that was CAG 8 aboard TR. VF-41 was the Tomcat squadron. And so they had slung a string of conventional bombs halfway across Bosnia. And so the Joint Task Force was like, we're not doing any more Tomcat conventional bombing. No. And so when we got there, we're like, we want to bomb. And they're like, no. So what we did is we were an extension of the Hornet's wing. So we'd carry bombs and we'd dial in the laser code of their lightning pod.
And they'd buddy lays for you.
Buddy lays, yes. And so they just go pickle, 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 and they'd guide the bomb, right? And so my point is, the Hornet guys had max attitude about how we were useless in terms of this threat that we were facing and the ability to help march the Serbs out of Sarajevo. We were very useful in terms of tarps, but there was no air threat. So, doing cap was kind of a joke. And we were not increasingly, if they didn't need us to buddy lays, we weren't involved. So literally strike planning doors were shutting in our face. Okay. So fast forward 2 years, now we have Lantern. And that PTID resolution compared to the Hornet's like bad, back when you had rabbit ears. And PTID was like cable. And our debrief tapes were, high res, and theirs sucked. And so suddenly we get the hard missions. We're like, don't hit the mosque, but hit the communications center. That was a Tomcat mission overnight because of Lantern and PTID. But the PTID was an important element because, you know, I'm walking the crosshairs. You know, I mean, obviously you'd punch in the Latin long and it would go, but sometimes you had to, you know, maneuver it because it wasn't quite where you wanted it. So you're sweetening up the shot. But I had a great picture, you know, and you'd done chart study and FLIR study. And so you kind of knew what you were looking for. And thank God that we had the PTID, you know. So my point is that the PTID in the real airplane was an important piece of hardware. And I get how in DCS, Heapler wants to, you know, just speed it up or not have so many configurations.
Yeah, I think that was the bigger deal. I think that was the bigger deal because Heapler's, from the inception, we were getting 2 Tomcats. Actually, we're going to end up, I think, with 3. The AGR-135, which we just got I think at the very end of last year. The B, and then the early model A with the ALR-45, you know, your favorite.
Yeah.
And so I think on Heapler's side, it was a compromise, basically. How many different cockpits do we want to have to worry about making? And
yeah,
I think they just kind of merged the PTID and the TID together just to, well, basically to save time, which...
Well, that's too bad. I mean, the B certainly should have a PTID in the back. But whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it still works. I've never, like I said, stick operating meat puppet up front. I've never used I've dabbled in some Rio stuff, but only using the AUG-9 radar and air-to-air. And y'all can have that. That is a level of obnoxious I'm not prepared to deal with. But speaking of that AUG-9, so there's a problem in DCS where the guys, okay, well, I'm not going to go that far, but let's just say a common strategy for people who kind of just want to go out and shoot stuff and instead of like actually try and learn systems and all that is they'll hide in mountains in their Su-27s and MiG-29s with their IRSTs. You fly over, they come up, lock you up infrared, zap you, and then they go back down and hide. So did you guys ever train to counter threats like that using the AUG-9's look down, shoot down? Because if I'm remembering, the AUG-9 was the first American radar with look down, shoot down capability.
Yeah. So, yes and no, you know, again, our primary training was for war at sea, over water, you know, long range, 500 miles away from the ship, shooting bears and badgers, with look up, look down, whatever. And so the AUG-9 loved being over water. And when you got on land, now this is where you got to work the gains and, you know, start to get rid of the clutter. And that's where the Rio really had to have sort of an AM radio fine touch to make the radar work, you know, in the pulse Doppler and track-while scan. Because you would get, like in the scenario you've just said, if I'm, you know, if I got my antenna 10, 15 degrees low, I'm going to be getting a lot of false, you know, I'm building all of these track-while scan targets. And then there you get the X because they're extrapolating. You realize, okay, that's a bogus track. And you're kind of playing a little bit of whack-a-mole. And that obviously that's a problem. The other thing, the Intel Fusion would be, okay, I need to be hearing from the E2. Are there other airplanes around that have, you know, sensor capabilities that are better than the F-14 that can, you know, either Link 4 or the other Gucci stuff that the F-35 has now, where you can build a picture, you know, not with my systems, but with other systems, and I can actually commit weapons against that. The scenario that you're talking about, we didn't really train to. That's a good one. It's a good one. And that's certainly a valid threat, because the other thing about RST is you wouldn't get spiked, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're completely, the guy's unseen, and then they just roll in on you, that's a big problem. I will say the AUG-9 had a problem in overland, mountainous terrain, look down. It did. I mean, that's just, it wasn't designed for that. It was designed for over water,
Blue water, long
blue
range.
water, that's where you're going to be fighting. The carrier was the entity that you were protecting. And then as the world changed, and suddenly we're doing, land threats, and we're doing Desert Storm, and we're not to mention OEF, suddenly, and Strike U and Top Gun got better about that, right? So again, my first tour, first time I do FARP, it's all over water, vacapes, and then we go out to Fallon, and now there's Strike U, and Strike U, remember, was created because of the Baca Valley raid, just like Top Gun was created because of their, shoot down ratio in Vietnam sucks so bad. Strike U was created because we got our shit handed to us in Baca Valley, and we realized, Alpha strikes, it's not World War II anymore. So maybe we should get a little bit more sophisticated about how we use the carrier strike warfare capability. And there you go. Now you got Strike U. Top Gun gets moved from Miramar to Strike U, or NSOC, or whatever the acronym is now. It's N5. It's one department in Strike U, and so now it's a more comprehensive look, and they're getting smarter on, or we were better on, how do we use the AUG-9. And so all kinds of techniques that did not exist in my JO days were being put out by the Strike U instructors and Top Gun instructors. So we could work the gains. We did train to that, in the mountains of Fallon, and the bandits would hide and try to do that terrain masking stuff. But, if they're down there, it's going to be hard to find them until they come up,
Makes
that's
sense.
when
At
you
least
get a good scan. Hopefully you got a good E2. But you were at risk there.
At least
So sort of
okay.
the takeaway there is to utilize the data link, right? Like let somebody else find them.
Yes.
So
yes.
how common was, it's another one of our questions is, like how often did the F-14 crews expect to have data link support from another asset? And how often would you get that from a big wing AWACS, the E3s? And how often did you use fighter to fighter data link?
Oh, wow. That's a great, the third part is a great question. So, so that's like, now you just shook something out of my head that hasn't been alive. So I'm thinking, I want to say, don't quote me on this, but tape 111, right? So we had the physical AUG-9 tapes would get updated, and it was a big deal. It was like Christmas for Rios, and so you get the new tapes loaded, and the Hughes guys would come out, and we'd be in the pubs, what can this thing do? And 111 was amazing because that's the first one that had fighter to fighter data link. And we're like, this is a game changer in terms of what you're talking about. So it's like, I can have your radar picture here, and so that helps build SA. I can't commit a weapon against your fighter data link, but I can, point my radar on the right piece of sky in order to create a link that I can commit a weapon against or create a track. So that was a fighter data link was a game changer in terms of how we did intercept tactics. And it was great for the situational awareness. Now, how often did we have data link? Well, during combined operations or something like OSW, every sortie, and you were getting data link from the AWACS, you got data link from your E2, and it was really good. It worked really well. And once you have it up and running, you're like, well, I feel like I'm, got my right hand cut off if I don't have it now. But early deployments, no data link. That wasn't even a thing. You were alone and unafraid, and half the time your DDD didn't work, or all you had was raw pulse radar, and you didn't have a Doppler system. You'd be running OBC or the other, WRA checks, and you'd come back with a map full of gripes. And, the other thing that would happen, now that I'm sort of pinging off the rando here, especially on the USS Independence, my first cruise, Cat 4 would dump the IMU. You'd have a beautiful alignment, and roger the wakeboard, wipe out the controls, pilot salutes, cat shot, and it was not a gradual shot, it was a really dramatic shot, and you would, like you hit a wall at the end, it would hit this bump, and it would just dump your IMU right off the cat.
Oh.
Which was, it was ridiculous. And so we're like, how about no Tomcats off Cat 4? And they finally reluctantly agreed. They're like, well, you know, we got a 24 airplane cycle here. We got to use all the cats. I'm like, okay, you know, A7s, A6 is Cat 4, Tomcats off everything else. So we fixed it. But, you know, and this is also when it took 10 days for a letter to get to the ship, you know, I mean, this is way before email and the different shit that we have now that we take for granted. But so I don't know if that answers, who was that?
It does.
Wrench or Bookworm?
That was Wrench. But
Okay.
it also ties nicely into another huge problem that we run into in the Tomcat, which is we have a data link contact on the AUG9 that we see. The first part, not the dumping your IMU because of too strong a cat shot, though that can happen if you crank the stick right when you come off, it'll screw up everything.
Oh, yeah?
But
Okay.
And on that point, I will also point out that 24 is also divisible by 3. Like we need to get 24 jets off the boat, and I'm like, you can do that with 3 cats.
I know, but they want to do it. They want to do it, you know, in a finite amount of time.
Yeah. Oh, that would just be my snarky response. That would get me in trouble.
That's the under the breath. That's the under the breath when the air boss leaves. Thank you for doing
the math, but that's the wrong answer.
But no, so when you've got that data link support, you can see a contact, you've got his altitude, you've got his bearing, you've got his vector, and you point the radar at it to try and light him up, and the triple D is blank. What do you do when you know in your heart that you are pointing this radar at the right piece of sky, but there's nothing there, but it's there on data link?
You keep going, you know, and so I've had that happen a lot, and it is nerve wracking. And so, you know, you QA the angle of, you know, that you're pointing the radar, you make sure you're in the mode you think you are. And the pilot's got to be eyes out, right? And it may come down to, you know, 10-mile tally. And now you've changed the scenario a little bit. You know, but I've had that happen. It's nerve wracking, right? Where the E2's giving you calls, angels, altitude, airspeed, and you're like, I am pointing at that piece of sky and a track isn't building, or I see nothing on the DDD. And it's frustrating and nerve wracking, you know, and this would happen a lot during, you know, FARP, where you're doing 40-mile setups, especially if you're doing a many v many. You know, and these are graded evolutions that you know, the squadron gets a grade, you get a grade, you know, during FARP. And, you know, it matters. And if the word gets out, oh yeah, you got to the merge, and the pilots are like, yeah, I didn't know anything. I just got to the merge. I was completely clueless. That's bad on Rios, you know? So it's frustrating and nerve wracking, you know, to have that happen. So I think the answer is you're not going to, you know, like just turn around and get out of there, you know. I mean, maybe if the section makes that call based on, okay, nobody's got a radar picture and you're getting to, you know, a pole range, let's redefine the fight, right? So, you know, cross turn, full blower, bug out, reset. Okay, let's try this again, you know. But usually, as you guys know, the pace doesn't allow that kind of, you know, redefining the fight is a luxury you usually don't have. So, I mean, I've gone to many merges where, hey, sorry, you know, meat puppet, I didn't build you a radar picture. Now I'm eyeballs out. Now I'm a co-pilot, and I will
Good
help.
luck.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, it's more than good luck. It's like, you know, you look there, I'm going to look here, right? Again, like I said in the latest episode, directive comms are what a Rio owes a pilot, not do some of that pilot shit mav. It's like brake right, pull, you know, stop, pull. He's across the circle. You see him. I don't see him. Okay, keep the pull coming.
Lift vector.
Just reverse. Yeah, I have seriously filled the windshield with Bandit through directive comms. And, you know, again, as I described in a recent the most recent episode, I had a great career progression with respect to the co-pilot duties because I had a lot of backseat time in both the VT-86 and A4s and at VF-43, the aggressor squad. So I flew TF-16s, F5Fs, TA-4s, and had buku stick time. And so I actually was fighting the airplane and got smart on, you know, that how do you redefine the fight, right? And so that made me a better Rio by the time I got to be a Cat 2 and a department head and a RAG instructor. And so I, as you saw in the latest episode, I'm very bullish on the co-pilot part. So when somebody's like button pusher or whatever, I'm like, no, that completely leaves out literally 50% of the mission. Never mind on the boat, or make sure you join at the right tanker, or, you know, this waypoint, not that waypoint. But ACM wise, to fly the airplane from the back seat, and this is where a crew has got to trust each other, right? And so if I say break right and you don't move, now we got a problem. We're going to talk about it in the debrief, right? So I loved it when I got, you know, again, voice activated autopilot, where the meter of my voice, the tenor of my voice.
I'm sorry, that was just really funny.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just, and that's in some regimes, you know, and some guys were hesitant. I flew with a guy named Tootie Cerruti, who is a former AAA baseball player. And he was a problem child in all ways. He was on the watch list for, you know, for his landings. And I got him because he was the problem child. And he had an attitude about listening to what I said. And we kind of had to have it come to Jesus. We finally worked it out. But, you know, I'm like, I'm not doing this just to, like, you know, boss you around. You know, I'm doing this because this is where the airplane needs to go, you know? So again, I digress here. If you don't have a radar picture, so if that happens at like 40 miles, you know, you can redefine the fight. And some guys will go, okay, I'm not, especially if you're doing a division or a section against unknown threat, you know, multiple bandits, and a fifth generation threat with forward quarter, long range, medium range capability, you know, like flankers and fulcrums, and you know, even these days the more advanced airplanes. I don't know what the simulation is. You know, do we have F-20s? Are we getting into 5th gen? So if you don't have a radar picture, and you don't know when to, you know, do forward quarter weapons avoidance maneuvers, then you're not going to go any, you know, into that merge, right? But if it's a 3rd generation threat, you know, like Gulf of Sidra 1 kind of thing, then yeah, you're gonna go to the merge all day and just hope the E2 talks you into a basket where you get a tally, and now, you know, it's sticks and stones. But that's not how DCS, unless you're doing a 1981 or Vietnam, like, you know, linebacker.
There's not many of those. Not many of those.
Well, because it's not fun, right? It's not fun, and it's not taxing your tactical awareness, right? So as you guys know, with some of the better scenarios where there is a SAM threat, where there's a multiple bandit threat, where you're working with another division, or your section has got to sort, range, sides, take the shot, missile avoidance, you know, where you dump the radar picture, and then you got to come back in and reacquire, you know, and that's where it got very, very challenging for the Rios to basically, you know, okay, here we are, Fox 3, when it goes active, now we're in that medium range where you can't shoot a Sparrow now, right? So you're going to go into the beam, anticipating a forward quarter shot from them, right? So you do the beam, 1 potato, 2 potato. Now you're pulling back in, and so you're blind. And now build me a radar picture at 15 miles, 14 miles. You know, as you got 1,500 knots of closure, and so we were like, holy shit! Right?
VSL.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good luck with that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm going to select VSL at 13 miles coming back in. But you know, you had to point the radar in the right piece of sky. This is where contracts were important between the Rios, you know, so that's something to think about. You know, who's got, you know, from 1 degree low to, you know, however degrees high, and then vice versa. You know, so you have some overlap, but everybody's painting their piece of sky, and then side to side. And then you sort and you make sure you have comms between the airplanes that you know who's locked on who, right? Because too often we'd both lock on the same airplane, you know, and you wouldn't discover it till the debrief, or you would discover it, you'd know. But, you know, that again, coming out of the missile avoidance maneuver, you know, back nose on was intense. And if you had a great radar and, you know, and again, that was the X factor, you know, these airplanes were temperamental, but if all modes were working and, you know, the radar power was there and you had a clean, you know, a nice, if I had a DDD and a TID that worked, like the simulator worked all day, but generally you didn't, you know? And so it was either, okay, I got track well scan, or I got a great pulse, nice clean pulse picture. So, you know, coming out of the you know, back into the nose on, again, somewhere between 13 and 15 miles. And now you got to quickly sort Fox 1, you know, and if you're flying Hornets, they're like AMRAAM, you know, everybody's dead. You know, it used to piss us off. They're like, okay, everybody's dead. We shot you with AMRAAMs. You know, we never even got to the merge, you know, and so again, we're thinking, okay, if we're going against Iranian threat, Iraqi threat, Russian threat, you know, they wouldn't have AMRAAM. So boom, we can probably get a Sparrow off. And now you're in the visual arena, right? So now, okay, Rio's done everything he can do with respect to Feeney bombs and Sparrows. We're sorted. So now the Mongols of the world are looking through the diamonds in their HUDs, getting the tallies, and now pilots are talking. So the comms go between the back seat to the front seat. And now it's you know, phone booth time.
So it wasn't Rio's handled all of the comms all of the time then.
No.
It would go back and forth.
Yeah. So, you know, when you're sorting, you know, like, you know, and you would have contracts, right? This is where briefing is very important, and your guys' training about this is where the Rios and the squadron should take a strain on the sort. You know, is it side to side? Is it lead trail? You need to go over these things. You need to whiteboard them, you know, and have those contracts established. So particularly when you shoot the Phoenix, you're shooting against the things that you had already talked about, right? And so you're not going to shoot Phoenix across each other, and you're not going to both go for the same guy. And so this is the Rios talking. Minimum comms, comm brevity. You know, we're not hogging the airwaves. It's like key the mic, say the burst transmission, get off the radio. You know, so comm brevity, really crisp, you know, sorted left, sorted right, Fox 3. And then, you know, if they go into the beam and make the missile stupid, maybe you go active to see maybe if the Phoenix has got, you know, enough horsepower and it's smart enough where it can acquire the target even if he beams you. So whatever, but now you know, okay, this fight isn't over. We didn't kill him with the Phoenix. And they're smart, right? Or maybe because the E2 didn't quite see that they're still orbiting, it looks like they're coming at you and it's like, no, they're actually still in holding. You know, they haven't really started even coming at you yet. That would be another. Sometimes the bandits, the aggressors would just do a wagon wheel, right? And so you'd see a track and it would go away and you're like, and then a track and it would go away. You're like, oh, they're beaming. And if you went to pulse, you'd just see a wagon wheel, right? It's like you had mode agility, you know, you would have recognized it right away. But if you just dedicated track while scan, you're like, okay, he's beaming. Okay, don't shoot. Okay, now I have another track. This guy's, you know, I don't know if it's the same bogey, different bogey, but here he comes. and you should just go to pulse and go, oh, they're just screwing with us doing a wagon wheel. So mode agility is key. And again, contracts, but Mongo, to answer your question. So now literally come back in the notch, sorted out of the notch. So again, that's predicated on you have a radar picture, which is easier said than done, and especially if your bandits are sophisticated, doing high-low splits, or they got, a section that's high and a section that's low, or they're doing a pincer, so the other thing, as you guys know, in the heat of battle, listening to the AWACS or the E2, sometimes you go brain dead on listening to your GCI controller because your eyes on your radar presentation. And sometimes I'd get in the tax trailer after the event and I realized the E2 was trying to protect me from myself, and I wasn't listening because I was just wedded to what I was seeing on the TID. So this gets back to what we're talking about in terms of Intel Fusion, whether it's mode 4 or it's fighter data link, or it's just a guy in the back of the E2 giving you, speed and range and altitude information on a contact that isn't the contact that you're painting. So building this picture, and again, this is where a pilot can help. So if a pilot is listening, and the good ones will, he can feed you a little bit of like, okay, that's the lead. Okay, we want to take that guy and we'll ignore that guy. So boom, let's assume we got a good radar picture. We're sorted, we're locked. Fox 1, missile time of flight. Now we're getting, by the time those missiles hit, what are you, 7 miles is what F-pole is for a Sparrow, and so now you're in the visual arena. You maybe could do a snap Sparrow shot at R-min, and if you got a 9 mic, now you're talking about face shots with a Sidewinder, and now you're merged, and it just becomes a whole different thing, right? Which is, and I'll do the Dogfighting 101 episode later this week. I got my training aids here. I actually built some models on sticks.
I did notice the Hornet hanging on the wall back there.
Yeah. So, I'm just going to talk about 1 circle, 2 circle fight, energy management, knowing the bandits' goods and others. How would you fight a Kafir or a Delta wing airplane? What was the advantages of a MiG-21? I'm going to do a whole nother episode about fighting the F-35 because I think that airplane's a pig.
Agreed.
It really is. It really is. I know the Air Force is like, oh, no, it's amazing. But if you get, into the phone booth, he's going to have a lot of trouble. He's got 1 turn and then he's slow and he's a grape. And so anyway, it's energy management, it's shots of opportunity, and it's survival, right? Like they say in Top Gun, live to fight another day. So know when to bug. And that's a trick. So especially if I have a supersonic bandit. So when I was in my first tour, the aggressor squadron had Kafirs, those Israeli airplanes. They were, delta wing, pointy nose, and supersonic, fast as shit. And so they could run you down. So when you bugged, you had to do it judiciously because you'd get shot during the bug. And so you had to know when to get out. And that's an art unto itself. So that's kind of the flow of your average, many v many. And we didn't even talk about if there's a SAM threat that you have to honor in the middle of that. I know that some scenarios have that, which I think is very cool, very realistic. And we didn't talk about, so what if you're doing a lantern mission and you get jumped, right? And so
that happened the other day, actually.
Okay. Yeah. So, you talk about things like, do you guys pickle the tanks in DCS?
Yeah, you can.
You definitely can. In our squadron, what we try and do the most is especially with the Tomcats, if we're doing ops off the carrier and not off the shore, because operationally you didn't really kick the tanks off unless you really, really had to, at least from what we've been able to find and read. We tend to keep them, but there have been instances, I think actually on Saturday, Wrench, you booted our tanks because we did. We were doing Bombcat stuff and on a public server, and we got jumped. We got jumped by the first one, I think, was an SU-27 that just came out of nowhere, and we ended up getting in close with him, got him with a Sidewinder. But there was like three friendlies, us included, and then there was like 4 Red 4 that came up from the south, and we were up here and got engaged. RWR starts screaming, so we dump countermeasures, start heading downhill, trying to figure out where these guys are. A couple of contrails over here coming north, probably bogeys, no missile trails, but RWR saying we're launched on, so you're doing all that. And it was insanity, actually. It's kind of the term, because I remember specifically we were downhill. We got visual with somebody, and Wrench and I are in VR, so we're really, cranking our heads around, looking around for these guys. And I got a guy up here plugged in full burner. We're in the Bravo, full burner, go uphill. I got Sidewinders trying to find him. He finally gets him. I just call Fox 2, come off this way. Don't see a path because he flew into a cloud. And then we come around, and there he is still. And I'm like, oh man, he's not down, and had to chase him down. I actually almost mid-aired him because he was, well,
what had happened is we did get a splash with a Fox 2, but it was on the other side of a cloud. So when we came around the cloud, we reverse the turn, come around the other way, and we pick him up visually, and he's still right where he was last we saw him. So we thought he was still up. So when we started closing the gap, we're like, oh shit, we got to get there and get him before he turns. Because he's going to reacquire and start to turn on us. So Mongo plugs the cans, and so we're closing on him at the speed of heat to try to get there before he turns on us. What had happened is he had gotten hit on the other side of the cloud, and the pilot, and so he was flamed out.
Oh,
so he was barely moving by the time we got there.
Okay.
And then by the time I realized it was like, oh shit, pull rudder, go up off this way, get around him. And then we were heading back. We were heading back to shore because we didn't have the right ordnance anyway, and we got jumped trying to get to a shore base to rearm, because you can do that in DCS, not real world obviously, but you operate in the world you live in. And it's so we're going down, and I'm like, oh man, hope I didn't break the jet. Looked at the accelerometer, 10 G's. I'm like, we're just gonna push that button right there. Don't tell anybody.
You broke the jet. 10
Very,
G
very
broke
much,
the jet.
very, very much so. The wings didn't come off though.
Yeah.
The wings stayed on the airplane.
They would 2 more sorties than they would. Yeah.
But yeah, it was we actually ran into an issue with that one because Wrench made the joke about, VSL. But we were in that visual arena, and I'm trying to get he throws me into VSL low. I'm trying to grab this guy with the radar to help the Sidewinder guidance, because I didn't want to have to pull all the way through to put the datum line on him.
Yeah.
Or the cord line. And it wasn't happening for whatever reason. I'm not, you probably know more about the system than I do.
Well, VSL, if you're talking about, behind the 3-9 line, VSL is also.
No. He was like up here.
When we were joking about VSL. VSL, like, as a coming out of the notch, going to VSL, that's kind of ridiculous. But in the ACM arena, right, VSL is awesome, and that's the mode of choice in most scenarios. So. Yeah,
when
like
would you
said,
set that for your pilot? Like once you guys got within visual, would you set that for him, or would you wait for him to call?
No, you'd wait because you didn't want the radar banging like that, and so, and maybe because the other thing is, you know, you're not actively working a radar picture while you're engaged, right? Again, now you're a co-pilot, and, you know, this is where crew responsibilities and crew coordination, active talking. I've got this guy. What do you got? You know, again, okay, he's, you know, at 4 o'clock, not nose on, keep going, press your guy. Okay, he just came nose on, let's break right, you know, and that's where the trust piece happened. But I'm not looking at the radar. So we actually would put extensions on VSL so I could feel it and give him VSL without actually looking down, you know?
Yeah,
From
from what I've
so,
heard, it was either a piece of heat shrink or a pen cap, right?
yes, pen cap is what we use most of the time. Yeah. And so, again, I wouldn't even be looking. I'm eyes out, checking 6. And he'll say, you know, and pilot would say, you know, VSL high, and I'd give it to him. And then the next thing you'd hear was Fox 2, you know? Again, you know, as you guys know, this, because the meter of DCS is accurate. These things are happening so quickly, you know, the things that sound so doable in the brief, when you're actually doing it, it sort of comes down to like instinct and having over prepared. That's why with the squadron, you got to make sure that people are disciplined about, you know, system study, briefing, debriefing, right? So the other thing that would be kind of cool, and again, I'm going to do this dogfighting 101. I know that DCS provides the tax sort of presentation, but if you guys would do a debrief before the tax presentation based on your drawn recreation of the engagement on an e-board card. So we would, and good pilots could, you know, between engagements, as you're flying, you know, rejoining and trying not to, you know, hit the ground or hit your wingman, you would draw the fight, you know, and so you get back from a flight, and these guys who long-time fighter pilots would have, you know, Hemingway novels on their kneeboard card, every detail, and they could recreate it. In fact, I have a dry erase board that I've bought, you know, to start to do that. But you should know the symbology, you know, for a climb, a descent, you know, the bandits red, the friendlies are green, and be able to draw it out, right? And then when you get in the debrief, now you're just not a cripple who's just letting the computer recreate it for you. So you've used your sort of, you know, post-mission skills to, in your mind's eye, think about what happened. And it forces you to be better prepared going into the next one, right? So I don't know if you guys are already doing that, but that's something you might want to think about, is do a pre-brief before the debrief using the tax that DCS has, which is very cool, right?
We do something kind of similar.
Okay.
Actually, we use a program called TACView. Anybody who's been in DCS for any amount of time learned a long time ago to kind of ignore the mission track recording, because it's not accurate at all. Maybe they fixed it recently, but it used to be like you'd go out and you'd fly your whole mission and you'd go home and land, right? Couple of you got into an air-to-air engagement, got a kill, go home and land. You go watch the mission track, you get shot.
I think we lost Mongo.
Yeah.
I would assume that if you've seen a tax presentation from DCS, that probably is actually the TAC view. So it's a separate program that kind of runs in tandem.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen that, and I was impressed, right? And it looks like, you know, a best in class tax trailer presentation. You know, because when I first started doing tax trailers, it was like what you see in Top Gun, right? Those like rudimentary geometric shapes, you know, and I guess we lost Mongo altogether, huh? Now the new ones are a lot like what GCS looks like. But again, what I'm saying is it's easy to just sort of fight the fight and then just wander over the tax trailer and just accept what you're being shown there. What a Top Gun instructor will, before they roll tape, will ask you to recreate the shots you took, the contract, all this kind of thing. So you got to kind of know what happened before they roll it. And if you're wildly off, they're like, well, which airplane were you in? Because the
Right.
and so it's just sort of a professionalism. And again, what I'm saying is, if you get good at that, it will make you a better pilot in Rio, in that, you're paying greater attention along the way. And it's just sort of, it's
Sorry
flight
about
discipline,
that,
I guess.
guys.
Yeah, we got you. We lost you for a second. You're back.
I BSOD'd actually. Not entirely sure why. That
Wow.
was, yeah. So that's what I'm doing after this, is figuring out where that came from.
Yeah. So the big takeaway there is, it's more effective training if you're debriefing it from your own memory and then using the tax to confirm what you think happened.
Perfectly said.
Note card.
Perfectly
Yep.
said.
Yep.
So-
that's going to be a thing.
We do need to be mindful of your time. We don't want to keep you all night. So if you do have
Yeah,
to jet,
I got to go away on the hour, right? So let's go through a few more questions.
okay. So we were talking about not being able to find a radar contact that is there either from a BRA or data link or whatever else. So one of the more technical questions that I had, and this comes with an asterisk, because it gets into system stuff that you may not be at liberty to discuss. But in DCS, the AGC speed control, parametric amplifier, pulse video control, jam jet controls aren't modeled, i.e. they have no actual effect on the AUG-9. So do you think that missing those systems and controls is something that really is negatively affecting our gameplay and or quote combat effectiveness in the sim? Or are those things that we can
No.
kind of live without?
You can live without. So that they would only be necessary in a jamming environment. And so my assumption is the game does not model the threat with jamming. So you tell me if you actually have jamming.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about chaff.
Not really.
I'm not talking about chaff where you get a bad lock.
Yeah,
I'm
ECM.
talking about ECM, ECCM.
Yeah, there's some
Actually, shot
ECM.
Phoenix.
I would say there's some gamey ECM included, but it's far from a simulation because of ITAR restrictions.
Yeah. Well, because this is where the jam jet and all that that's the ADFAS, advanced phase of the RAG syllabus. You would see you'd lock it up in Pulse and you'd look for these, kind of weird things that were trying to take the lock and walk it away from the true Doppler. And then suddenly the radar's not locked anymore. That kind of thing. So, you start to get into the esoterica of the AUG-9, and I think for DCS, it's you're unless they fully want to go classified, kind of stuff, because now you start talking about, knowing the threat's capabilities with respect to what type of jamming and what was the Tomcats, ability to deal with it and get around it. So, again, you're taxing the knowledge I haven't had, since really my first cruise, right? Because this was when we had the Soviet Union as the threat, that was top of mind. And then as we started doing, Desert Storm, and certainly when you're doing OEF, there's no air threat. And this kind of using the Tomcat in that way just fell off the table. So it's more Lantern, zero counter jamming air-to-air stuff, right? Yeah, I think the last time I heard jam jet was literally 1987.
Okay, well, it's good to know
Fair
that
enough.
it's good to know that that's the kind of thing that we can really live without, and Heapler didn't leave it out just because it was too hard.
Yeah, no, I think practically you can leave it out.
All right, so then the last one, we organized these into broad categories because we weren't sure kind of how quickly we were going to run through them.
Okay.
So the last one in the radar category is how would you decide which VC rate, closure rate, and aspect switch to set on the triple D and the missile speed gate on the armament panel?
Okay, so remind me what the options were, and I can answer that on the DDD.
So for Victor Charlie, I want to say you have normal and times 4. So that affects where targets will be displayed on the triple D regarding their.
So always normal, never times 4. That was if you were trying to shoot down an AS4 or something, right?
Okay.
And so what we used to say is shoot Indians, not arrows, and so let's shoot down the bear. Let's not shoot down the AS4. And so normal is the answer. I never came out of normal in real life.
Okay. And then for the aspect on the triple D, I think it's nose, tail, and some intermediate setting.
Yeah. I that would be a function of the aspect, the target aspect of the contact, right? You could move that around.
Okay.
I don't
And
remember
then
monkeying with those too much, really.
right. Okay. And then I imagine the missile speed gate's going to be more or less the same, where that's based on what you expect the bandit to be doing.
Yes.
Okay.
One that I want to make sure that I ask just for my own understanding, when you guys were on the ship, or on the ship more importantly, because that's where we normally fly the Tomcat off of in DCS. When would you guys start running through your takeoff, like the takeoff checklist? And was the version that you and your pilot would call and answer back and forth verbatim what's printed in the NATOPS, or did you guys have like squadron, flight, or even section level like takeoff checklists that you would have that were like, shorthand versions to get done?
No. So the takeoff check you would do after you chalks and chains, you're taxiing to the cat. You'd probably finish it up behind the JBD, obviously spreading the wings and the other parts. But there's some things you could do, like seats armed and everything else, but it was verbatim, challenge and response, verbatim. And the landing checklist, however, was just the pilot raging through, gear, flaps,
right,
trim, DLC, my harness is locked, check yours, hooks down, that's it. There wasn't challenge and response. Takeoff checklist was challenge and response.
Right.
But
Cool.
Verbatim, you're not audibling there.
Wrench, we've been doing it right the entire time.
Yeah.
Hooray!
Yeah.
It had been a conversation he and I had on a couple of times, because you can set a knee board in DCS, and on my knee board I have the 2 pages out of the NATOPS for the checklist, and he'd be like, we can strip this down because there's stuff we don't really have to. I'm like, it's in the manual, we do it. And he's like, well, okay, we'll do it. But it was always like
that's a gross mischaracterization of me in that conversation.
It is a little bit. Of the 2 of us, Wrench is the rivet counter. But why do we do flight sim if not for procedures? That's like kind of half the point. And so
I think, right? That's the realism part, right?
Right.
That's what's you want to be disciplined about that. So yeah, I think that's the way to go.
So okay, cool. I'm glad that is settled, that I finally got it from the horse's mouth.
So there's one question that I wanted to throw at you, because it's like a big, huge debate in the DCS community at large. And I just wanted to seize the opportunity to talk to somebody that's been there, done that about it, before we have to call it quits. So I'm just going to read out how I typed it. So there's a lot of debate in the DCS community about missile ranges. So this debate centers around the definition of terms and what we should expect a missile to do at a particular range. Particularly R arrow, R max, RNE, RPK, and those kind of things. So a good example is, depending on who you ask, R max means that assuming that the target does not maneuver at all, the missile will be stalling by the time it hits the target, which I think is a really stringent definition of that term. And the issue that this causes, the vagueness of those terms, the issue that causes is your hit probability is drastically affected by the definition of those terms, because they'll use the same symbology for, this is an RMAX shot. So an RMAX shot in the Tomcat in DCS is theoretically the same, or as close as they could make it to what the symbology would tell you in the real thing. But if the PK in ED's definition is significantly lower than the PK from the actual definition, that would be a huge problem for us.
Yeah, so again, I'm a simple man. RMAX is just the range, is you're talking about, not about like aerodynamic performance like stall, you're talking about lethality, right? So that's the longest range at which the weapon will hit the target and fuse, you know? So that's what RMAX means to me. And RMIN is obviously the corollary to that. RMIN is the shortest range at which the missile will, you know, either hack the turn or fuse or whatever it is. So that's how I think, you know, RMAX, RMIN. ROPT is the obviously optimum, where the PK goes way up, right? And so those are the three categories: RMAX, ROPT, RMIN, and that's kind of it, you know. And then you talk about A pole and F pole. You know, that's the range at which the missile goes active, the range between you and the bandit, and then F pole is the range you're between the fighter and the bandit at impact, right? When the thing goes off. And this matters in terms of, you know, follow-on targeting, especially if you're in an SDT mode. You care a lot about F pole. You know, if you're out of Phoenix and now you're only using Sparrows, then you care a lot about F pole.
So would you actually use the Phoenix on a fighter target, or was that really only for your bears?
Well, yeah, you'd use Phoenix if you're going against a fighter threat. Yeah, absolutely. Right. If you're doing defensive counter air against, you know, MiG-29s, yeah, you'll use Phoenix. Absolutely.
I've heard some debate that the Phoenix was basically too big, too heavy, and had too much inertia to be able to turn and hit a fighter.
Well, so, I mean, again, this is a complex answer. If you're talking about, you know, the money sample data active, long range, 80-mile shot kind of thing, you know, the Phoenix didn't care whether it was, you know, a 100 square, you know, whatever the radar cross section was, 100 square foot or 10 square foot, it would go after it. You know, especially like this the Charlie Plus, that was a lethal weapon, and it had the aerodynamic capability to be able to hack it. Now, the problem is when you get in the mid-course guidance, you know, so you start and you've got radar support, then it goes sort of mid-course, and then it goes active, are the three phases. So if you go into the beam mid, if the bandit does, then the Phoenix is going to go stupid. And so when you see that happening, you just go to active, hope the missile has already maybe gone active, and you still have a chance. But now you're thinking, okay, that one's going to go stupid. And so a fighter is more likely to do something like that than a bear, right? But if your loadout's 2, 2, and 2 against a fighter threat, I would be launching Phoenix, you know, as soon as I could.
So that's one thing I didn't realize, that you could use the Phoenix active switch. Excuse me. You could use the Phoenix active switch to send a Phoenix active that was already in the air.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is a useful little tidbit.
That is worthy of some testing.
Some say it didn't work very well, but that was what it's designed to do, right? To cut, you'd say that was called cut the missile, cut it to active.
That's worth some testing. in DCS to see if Heapler
Yeah, check it
modeled
out.
that.
Yeah.
I know, Mooch, I know you got to get going. We're at the hour.
Yeah. So just real quick, what episodes would you guys like me to do? What topics are meaningful to the squadron?
Oh man. I mean, anything regarding tactics as a 2-ship, 4-ship, 4-ship flights working in tandem. God, the more technical, the better about, the AUG-9 radar and how that would be used, in a combat situation and how that would be managed. And to give you an idea, when Heapler announced the F-14 and we were T-minus 1 year to release, Wrench and I went online and we got the NATOPS for the A, which is published.
Okay.
And for that year, he and I would get together on Discord and we read that sucker cover to cover, going through everything. Okay, already knowing I'm going to be the pilot. He's going to be the Rio. What are our crew contracts going to be? How is it in the NATOPS? How are we going to adjust to suit what I'm good at, what he's good at? And literally, we did this for a whole year.
That's
and
fantastic.
then when it finally dropped, I still remember the first flight in the Tomcat, the day it was released. He and I, it took us 45 minutes just to get to the cat. Because we started at the pre-start inspection checklist.
Okay.
And we went through every item, looking for every switch, every knob, making sure we knew where it was, doing all the tests with the master test switch. Took us 45 minutes to get to the cat. And then unbeknownst to me, he'd written a script under it that the instant we were off the end of the boat, Kickstart My Heart by Motley Crue started playing. And it was the coolest moment I have ever had in my life. And neither one of us had the wherewithal to record it.
Oh,
but it is hands down my fondest memory. I mean, I grew up, I was 4 years old watching Top Gun, flying the F-14 was what I wanted to do. And then it retired in 2006 and I was crushed.
Yeah.
But, so the level of nerdery that Wrench and I are capable of. And then Bookworm, our good friend Bookworm here, he has his call sign for a reason. Because that's how we do it in our squadron. Is military real world assigned call signs are sacred. They don't get changed because they're legitimate. Everybody else though has an earned call sign, and it's usually not very nice.
Well, that's the real world. Chapter 2 of Punk's War explains the etymology of call signs. So anyway, all right, guys, I gotta to go do something else before I crash here.
Yeah,
thanks
we're
for
7
the time.
minutes
Thanks
over.
for the invitation. You guys are shit hot. This is impressive. I'm stoked to get to know more. Hopefully I can fly with you. And let's be in touch. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I'll get you an invite to the Discord server. It means a lot. It really does. To get called shit hot from a guy who was actually there.
No, but you are.
Thank you.
You are.
Very much appreciated.
You guys are taking a strain. Your motivation is motivating me. It's real. This is real, and the Tomcat lives through the squadron. This is great, and that's why when I'm talking Tomcat in the episodes of the channel, I'm using present tense because it's alive. It's not like when 100%. I was a Rio. It's like, and the Rio does this. It's not like the Rio used to do this. It's like the Rio does this. And that's all about what you guys are doing. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm super geeked. Thank you again so much for agreeing to come and talk to us. I apologize for the tangents. Obviously, I love to talk about all the sea stories and everything.
That's what we wanted you here for.
That's what you get with me, as you know from the channel.
100. You're not going to hear a complaint out of us at all. Cool. We've all been looking forward to this since we actually got it nailed down. So this was great. I cannot wait until we can get you into the sim with us and that'll just be awesome. So yeah,
All right.
I'll get you that
Okay,
email
guys.
and take care,
All right,
Mooch.
thanks a lot,
again,
Mooch.
man.
Okay. Thanks, Wrench. Thanks, Bookworm. Thanks, Manga. We'll talk
Yes,
to you.
sir. Take it easy. Have a good night.
Right. You too.